Now we cover the task of the Holocaust and prisoners of war. So, anti Semitism throughout history. In the Middle Ages, Jews were blamed for killing Jesus. Through the Reformation, Catholics and Lutherans persecuted Jews, accusing them of blood libels, which means kidnapping and murdering Christian children, and using their blood as part of religious rituals. And they also suggested them to pogroms, um, which were violent riots aimed at the massacre of an ethnic or religious group. The Volkisch movement was late 19th century Germany and Austria-Hungary embraced pseudo-scientific racism that viewed Jews as a race whose members were locked in mortal combat with the Aryan race for world domination. And after World War I, there was this belief in a secret Jewish conspiracy that ruled the world, and Hitler used it as a justification for his anti-Semitism. In April 1933, there was a boycott of Jewish businesses, law for the restoration of the professional civil service, which excluded Jews and non-Aryans from civil service, aka working for the government. They were disbarred from practicing law. They were not allowed to be editors of newspapers or own farms. In July of 1933, the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, also known as the sterilization law, made sterilization mandatory. There were 300,000 to 400,000 involuntary sterilizations of Jews. The New York Times reported on the sterilizations that they were for congenital mental deficiency, schizophrenia, manic depressive insanity, hereditary epilepsy, Huntington's disease, hereditary blindness, hereditary deafness, basically any severe hereditary deformity, and alcoholism. From October 1939, there was the euthanasia decree, where 80,000 to 100,000 mentally ill adults in hospitals were killed, 5,000 children were killed, and 1,000 Jews were killed. Overall, mentally and physically handicapped murdered was about 150,000. The Nuremberg laws were put in place in September 1935. Only those of German or kindred blood could be citizens. Interracial marriages were forbidden. Jews were not allowed to employ German women under 45 in their homes, and they forced the Jews to emigrate. So Albert Einstein, Gustav Hertz, who was a scientist, Bruno Walter, a conductor, and Sigmund Freud, a neurologist, all left Germany during this time. Kristallnacht was the night of broken glass on November 9th, 1938. It was basically a pogrom against Jews. Over 7,500 Jewish shops out of 9,000, so overwhelming majority, were looted and attacked. Over 1,000 synagogues were damaged or destroyed. Jews were forced by the crowd to watch their synagogues burn. At least 90 Jews died, and then many were sent to Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen concentration camps. Dachau concentration camp was opened in 1933 to hold political prisoners. Buchenwald was opened in July 1937, and Sachsenhausen was opened from 1936 to 1945 to mainly hold political prisoners. Concentration camps started as penal and terror camps. In 1942, economic considerations started to take control. Vernichtung durch Arbeit was extermination through labor, was generally the policy in concentration camps. Prisoners wore colored triangles showing the reason for their incarceration. Red meant you were a political prisoner. Purple meant you were a Jehovah's Witness, religious group. Black and green were asocials and criminals. Asocials are people who do not conform to social norms, like beggars, alcoholics, drug addicts, prostitutes, and pacifists. Pink was for gay men. Yellow was for Jews. It was a six-pointed star instead of a triangle. Auschwitz prisoners were tattooed with an identification number upon their arrival. Jews were forced into ghettos, closed off from the outside world, and originally they were meant for Jews to temporarily be held and then deported to other locations, and often inhabitants were sent from ghettos to extermination camps. There were major pogroms, at least 10 of them in 1941 alone. In Odessa, 25,000 Jews were murdered. And Isai, 14,850 Jews died. The death squads were mass killings of Jews in German-occupied Soviet areas, which had about 2 million victims. Extermination camps were part of the final solution, which took place from 1941 to 1945. There were 6 major extermination camps in occupied Poland: Auschwitz II-Birkenau, Majdanek, Chełmno, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka II. Over 3 million Jews were murdered in 1942 alone. They used gas chambers. Mass shootings were causing psychological problems in the SS, so they started using the gas chambers instead. Zyklon B, which was hydrogen cyanide, was the gas used to kill the people in extermination camps. The Polish government, in exile in London, learned about the Holocaust starting in 1940. The Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs sent out diplomatic notes about German atrocities in 1942 based on reports from areas that the Red Army had liberated. June 1942, an escaped prisoner from Chełmno shared information and sent it to London. July to August of 1942, Polish leaders learned about mass killings in Auschwitz. London and the United States were notified in November of 1942. The British and US leaders did not want to publicize what they knew and make the focus of the war on Jews. So foreign governments definitely knew that the Holocaust was happening, and they knew about concentration and extermination camps long before they ever publicized it. The Holocaust killed Poles, so Polish people, Slavs, Gypsies, homosexuals, mentally ill, and the physically handicapped. We're talking about 12 million people dead, 6 million Jews, 6 million other people. That's a lot of people dead from the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials were conducted to hold Nazi leaders and other individuals accountable for their participation in war crimes, regardless of any orders they had received, which led to an increased demand for a Jewish homeland, eventually became Israel. As for prisoners of war, the Geneva Convention had established international rules concerning the humane treatment of prisoners of war. The treatment of POWs in Europe more closely followed the Geneva Convention, while in the Pacific, it was pretty savage. The Bataan Death March was the forcible transfer of individuals by the Japanese army. We're talking 60 to 80,000 American and Filipino POWs over 60 to 70 miles. It was pretty severe physical abuse and wanton killings. So, yay, Holocaust and POWs of World War II.